So good afternoon. My name is Jack Lynch. I am the CEO of Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, and I am joined here today by some amazing leaders in education. To my left, Lisa Haring, the superintendent of Birmingham City Schools, the fourth largest school district in Alabama, about 25,000 students and 42 schools. Birmingham City Schools has a student population that is approximately 95% African American, 4% Hispanic, and 1% white. 88% of the students qualify for a free and reduced lunch, and the district-wide graduation rate is 65%. Prior to joining Birmingham City Schools, Dr. Haring was the Chief Academic Officer, Jefferson County Public Schools in Kentucky, and prior to Jefferson County, she held several leadership positions in Charleston County, Bibb County, and DeKalb County. Lisa holds a doctorate degree in education administration from Georgia Southern University, a specialist degree in counselor education, and master's degree in school counseling from the University of South Carolina, and a bachelor's degree in English from Spelman College in Atlanta.
That was one thing.
And to Lisa's furthest to my left, Henry Hips is the deputy director on the K-12 education team at the Gates Foundation, where he supports the work on improving the availability, awareness, and implementation of high-leverage solutions that support teachers and increase student achievement. He has also worked at the intersection of teacher and student support, solution development, market-driven strategies to foster improvement of curriculum and instructional tools and education technology. Previously, Henry was a senior director at the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools, Mayor Valer Ragosa School Turnaround Organization. Henry was also the founder and CEO of Trajectory Learning, where he delivered web-based K-12 courseware, culturally relevant content designed to increase student engagement. Prior to his work in education, Henry was engagement manager at IBM Consulting, where he led global teams on business and technology consulting engagements. Throughout his career, Henry has sought opportunities to use entrepreneurship, innovation as tools to create social impact. He was awarded a Fulbright scholarship in Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay to work with high-potential startups which were poised to drive economic growth in the region. He holds a master's degree from Georgia Tech and completed his undergraduate work at the University of Pennsylvania. And then last but not least, in the center, Alberto Carvalho has served as superintendent of Miami-Dade County Public Schools, which is the nation's fourth largest school district since 2008. During his tenure, Miami-Dade has become one of the nation's highest performing urban school systems, receiving system-wide accreditation from Advanced Ed, and was recognized with the 2012 Broad Prize for Urban Education, 2014 College Board Advanced Placement Equity and Excellence District of the Year, and 2019 Cambridge District of the Year. Alberto is a staunch believer in school choice. He's expanded choice options in Miami-Dade to include over 1,000 offerings, including fine and performing arts, biotechnology, engineering, robotics, aviation, and forensic sciences. He is the founder and principal of the award-winning iPrep Academy, a model of robust 21st century learning in the age of innovation and technology. He has been named Florida's 2014 Superintendent of the Year, 2016 winner of the Harold W. McGraw Prize, which is given at this conference, 2018 Urban Superintendent of the Year, 2019 NABE Superintendent of the Year, and AASA's 2014 National Superintendent of the Year, and one of Scholastic Administrators, the Fantastic Five Educators Making a Difference in America. Don't you do that. Don't you do that. And I'm not finished. Hold on. And finally, Alberto has been awarded many honorary degrees, including Doctor of Public Service from Florida International, Doctor of Humane Letters from Barry University and Florida Memorial University, and a Doctor of Pedagogy honoris causa from Nova Southeastern University. He has been honored by the President of Portugal with the Ordem de Mérito Civil and Mexico with the Otley Award. So this is an incredible panel, as you can see, and the reason I will be admonished for this, but the reason I went through their bios is that I want you as the audience to really understand the perspective that they bring to this topic. And so what I'd like to do is begin with Henry. And Henry, for folks in the audience who are not familiar with education equity, could you do two things? One, first, for the audience, define what education equity is. And then secondly, talk a bit about your passion for equity and why you believe it is one of the most important social justice issues in our nation today.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks for the invitation. So there's a saying that resonates with me, and it's that our genius is equally distributed by zip code, but opportunity and access are not. And so this question of education equity, for me, is really the work of recognizing the number of students we have in this country whose genius is here and their opportunity set, by no fault of their own, is here. And the question is, how do we work systematically to actually move their opportunity set to where their genius is? And for me, it's a big issue because it's going directly after structural issues that were actually embedded in the definition of what this country started as, right? So these structural issues around race, around gender, around class are actually contributing to that gap between genius and opportunity. And so that's why the work is so hard, but that's why it's actually so critical. For me, it's a deeply personal thing. I did not start in education. I came into education with a recognition of what it's meant for my life and how quickly and easily I almost fell off the track. Having grown up in Springfield, Massachusetts, and being a black boy in that public education system was to be placed directly in the middle of some of those issues around those structural inequities. And I went to a predominantly white elementary school, and pretty early in the game, started getting put out of class regularly, same behavior as my buddies, but I was the one who was always going to the principal's office. All my academic marks were high, but they deemed me a behavior issue. And I went to the principal's office all the time. Like, she knew me, I knew her. Like, my mother would have to leave work to come get me from school, and I don't think anybody knows my mother in this audience, but I can assure you, Jack, that was not a good look. And so it's something that's deeply embedded for me in the work that I bring to the foundation, where most recently, as we've really taken a step back and thinking about our strategy, we have come back out with a strategy refresh about 1.5 years ago, where we have explicitly named Black, Latino, and low-income students as the focus of our strategy.
Excellent. Thanks, Henry. Alberto, you've had firsthand experience with extreme poverty, not only as a child, but young adult. This is a deeply personal issue for you as well.
It certainly is, Jack. So I'm an immigrant to this country. I'm an American by choice, not by chance. I think I check off all the boxes. I grew up with disability. I came as a young man to this country unaccompanied. I was deemed illegal in this country. I was once homeless, always poor, first in my family to graduate high school, family of 6, grew up in a one-room apartment, no running water or electricity, a curtain separating mom and dad from the kids. And interestingly, I was once homeless in South Florida, blocks away from, actually lived under the bridge, blocks away from the office that today I occupy as superintendent of schools. So this is very, very personal to me. And the conclusion I draw from it is if I, as a truly unremarkable human being, was able to make it, then every single kid across America absolutely should have the chance to make it. We're all endowed with the same exact number of chromosomes, with the same God-given potential, the same ability, the same capacity. And if we do not make it, and if our kids don't make it, it's not because they failed themselves, it's because somehow the system of adults around them failed them. I never really met broken children, but I've met broken systems of adults that do not acknowledge their dreams, their potential, their aspirations, therefore the final destination they could achieve. So following on what Henry said, this is a great land where opportunity is given every single day. But unfortunately, many kids do not seem to fully realize it. And when we speak about educational equity, it's like can be most easily defined as sort of the booster seat for kids. If you want them to sit at the table with the opportunity to see eye to eye with everybody else at the table, you need to sit them a little higher. You cannot sit them at the same level everybody sits, otherwise they never get to eat. So equity in education, quite frankly, is the differentiated set of factors that must be leveraged as a means of reaching equal outcomes. If we provide the same level of funding, the same level of instruction, the same school day, the same everything, but you're starting from a much lower starting point, you may never reach an equal outcome.
Right.
So equity is, quite frankly, the differentiated approach or levers of factors that lead towards an equal outcome for all kids. And in the process of reaching that idealized point, we really need to restructure everything in education today, because we never had an equitable educational system in America. Mm-hmm. You know, we fool ourselves if we believe we did. To reach that point, we really need to change everything, and hopefully throughout the conversation we'll touch on that a little bit more.
Yeah. And Lisa, tell us a bit about your personal story. What motivated you not only to become an educator, but it seems like you've picked the most socioeconomically disadvantaged school districts in the country. What was your motivation?
So for me, the motivation to even pursue education came from my grandparents. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was a sharecropper. He had the opportunity to go to school for 3 days in his entire life. When he died at the age of 96, one of the things he had the opportunity to see was what education did for his children and his grandchildren. Mm-hmm. But he spent 96 years of his life communicating to us why education was the one thing that if we were committed to it, not only could it be ours to keep forever, but it's the game changer for helping us to navigate society. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, I am a product of public education. I'm a graduate of Southwest High School in Macon, Georgia. If you're not from Macon, that might not be a hoorah. That's important to me because my public education experience was powerful for me. However, when I have conversations with members of my family, my brothers, for example, versus my experience, and I have 3 brothers, it was different. It was different for them as young black men. The other change for me was that several years ago, I became a mother. I was not married, and my life changed, and that was my biggest difference maker, my daughter. Knowing what I wanted to see for her as it related to not just our mutual pursuit of education, but as a single African-American female in education, that was my driver to go for higher degrees, and it was also my pursuit for leadership. So it wouldn't be fair for me to not own that there's this leadership factor that my parents, I don't know that they intentionally pushed that into all of their children, but it happened. Mm-hmm. In this world of education and this conversation around equity, I've had the opportunity to teach and to work in both the private education sector, private in Pittsburgh, and then public in multiple states. Alberto said it correctly. There is something that is demanding our need to aggressively disrupt. So for me, the child or the grandchild of a sharecropper who recognizes every day that we teach on an agrarian calendar, that is what we use to ensure that students have enough time for instruction, there's a challenge in that formula. Mm-hmm. For me, I have worked in districts like Charleston, currently like Birmingham, my hometown of Macon or Louisville, where the inequities are very prevalent, but the conversations are not always. Yep. And that is my understanding of my calling to be a voice, to champion those courageous conversations and move beyond the conversation to action. I don't think that I knew how complex that would be, but I am grateful that I have the opportunity to be a voice. Yeah. All of those collective factors have put me in this position today.
Excellent. One of the questions I have for the entire panel, if you look at, there's a professor at UCLA, Tyrone Howard, who is really focused on education equity as a social justice issue. And one of the statistics that he often cites is the classroom statistic in our top 100 nation school districts. And he'll say in the top 100, you'll find, of the 30 kids in a class, you'll find 10 that are in poverty. You will find 3 that are in extreme poverty. You'll find 1 that's actually homeless. And then you'll find that 7 of the 30 have experienced some form of abuse and chronic trauma. And so I guess for the panel, how do teachers across the nation cope with the challenges that these kids face outside the classroom?
So I'm going to just jump in and try to be responsive to that in terms of how do teachers, and your statement was cope. So I think cope is a very appropriate statement because that's what we find ourselves trying to solve even today. Those statistics are probably multiplied for me in Birmingham City Schools for our teachers and for our students. It's a day-to-day reality. It is, you cope by knowing your students and having relationships, but you also cope by hoping that you find yourself in a learning environment where you are supported and there is a true awareness of the needs of every child by name, that the need matches the name. But that coping mechanism for teachers is something that I don't think we talk about enough, because there's not enough professional development out there that really is addressing that intersection between the student needing support and that the adult might need it also. And that even in the classroom, as they try to navigate that, have we provided enough resources to do that? But when we do execute that well, part of that support mechanism is that we've put systems in place to help identify students with needs, but we don't find ourselves solely relying on the system, but there is also an element of what's in the heart and mind of the adult that's helping to support the child, not just the teacher. Could be school psychologist, could be school counselor, can be principal. It can be the cafeteria worker, right? That goes back to the relationships. But the systems that are in place to provide the appropriate interventions are a part of the coping mechanism. I own that we have a responsibility to enhance what we provide to professionally develop and also put a system of support around teachers for whom that's their reality.
Yeah. Alberto, how do you help your teachers?
My experience as an educator and even as a father is that every single academic achievement gap that I've come across, collectively groups of students, specific grade levels or systemic, is always preceded by opportunity gaps. They are pervasive, generational in nature, and often dictated by zip code of birth. Yeah. So opportunity gaps that are not mitigated during the first years of life of children. And those are food insecurity, poverty, violence in the streets, lack of adequate, high-quality early child care programming, exposure to a rich vocabulary by parents, just acceptable and expected nurturing of parents themselves to children. Those opportunity gaps, which are often compounded in nature, particularly in urban settings, mature into academic gaps.
Right.
And those academic gaps, quite frankly, if not identified early enough and addressed within the K-12 continuum, become generational economic gaps. So I say that because in the middle between the opportunity gaps and the economic gaps have terrible or terrific impacts on the future workforce. Opportunity gaps have terrible or terrific impacts on the K-12 viability of children. Stuck in the middle are teachers.
Right.
So I actually look at the teachers today as knowledge facilitators. I think they are the freedom fighters of today's America. They are the ones who will either make or break children.
Yeah.
And I don't see them, quite frankly, as individuals who are coping with. Some definitely are. But the word coping with denotes, to me, some degree of victim status. You're a victim, therefore you're coping with something. I actually want them to be change agents of the lives of children who are coping with misery, with detachment, with disappointment, with abandonment, with food insecurity, with homelessness, with poverty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Easier said than done.
Right.
For them to be change agents, you need to create environments of professional development and nurturing and support to the teachers, side by side with the support and nurturing environments you're providing to the students. It's not an either-or proposition, it's a both and imperative and mandate in school systems today. Particularly in areas that we know well, whether it's Miami or Chicago or New York, where often kids are born into zip codes where violence in the streets and the disintegration of family and poverty are really transformational to the lives of children. Right. So the one individual who's often the surrogate father, mother, is the teacher. So the teacher is not only a pedagogical expert, is not only an academic expert, but needs to also become a social and emotional support element, stabilizing force in the lives of children. In Miami-Dade, I can tell you, we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time, 3 weeks every summer during Synergy Professional Development, in grooming that new social and emotional support mentality for the benefit of teachers to ultimately benefit kids. If we do not do that, I promise you one thing, because I'm a true believer, that you cannot teach the child's mind whose heart you did not touch. And that social emotional connection from the teacher's mind to the child's heart actually opens the door to the learning on the part of that child. It is not easy, and quite frankly, to reach the point where we are actually empowering teachers with the ability to teach the mind and the heart to become both healers and enlighteners. We need to pay them more, train them better. Yes. The colleges of education across the country need to do a better job, particularly in preparing and forming the teachers going to the trench of urban education and rural education and migrant student education that right now, quite frankly, in my opinion, are not doing enough to prepare them, to provide them the skill set they need, not only to survive, but to actually thrive in a very high demand environment that could break a teacher within the first 5 years of their career.
Yeah. You know, Henry, one of the issues, and Alberto talks about connection. You know, there are connections that a teacher of color will naturally have with students of color based on shared experiences that are hard to replicate for a Caucasian teacher teaching students of color. Can you talk a little bit about underrepresentation and is there a greater connection or greater opportunity of connection with shared experience versus not?
Yeah, I mean, the research definitely bears out that reality, that students of color actually get real benefit from having teachers of color in their lives. And we have a significant shortage of teachers of color, particularly male teachers of color. But one thing I do want to say, though, is that the question of teachers of color and their representation are as much about all students as they are about students of color. And so it is critically important for all students to have a diversity of experiences with folks that are in those positions of authority and leadership in their lives in the role of teachers. But for sure, when we talk about identity formation and role models and proximity and near networks, the teachers are really critically important figures in students of color's lives. And so to grow up with the complete absence of those figures of color, as I did, it leaves a mark. There's no question.
Yeah. Lisa, how about you? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I was thinking about Henry's response, to which I do agree. I am in a system where the vast majority of our teachers are teachers of color, and you've shared our statistics as it relates to our overall racial demographic. We're 95% African American. So do I believe that there is a necessity and an impact in that space? Absolutely. But there are a couple of additional factors that I see that I think we also have to be courageous about addressing, and that is a level of comfort that we sometimes find in identity, that we don't want there to be an exchange of experiences that we take for granted, because a teacher of color could also still be culturally irresponsible in the way he or she provides resources for students, and so that is a critical factor. Sometimes just in the reality of the familiarity of the environment, the levels of expectations may not always be where we want to see them, and so there's a greater responsibility for us as a system, and I mean this across the full gamut of public education, to be clear about the expectations we set for anyone who steps into the classroom. To be culturally responsive, to make sure that the resources are, whether you look alike or you do not, then there's a bonus to that experience when there is a cultural identity space there. My first teaching experience was in an all-Jewish, predominantly white school, where the vast majority of my students had not interacted with an African American, and then I was from the South, and they were so disappointed that I didn't have the Southern drawl that they were looking for. But what the children knew very quickly, and this was my first year teaching, was that there was a heart that was there for them. And it was a very affluent school where resources were abundant. But the way that they had gone through their experiences and exchanges with adults were very different. And I would like to believe, because I'm still in touch with some of those doctors today, okay, that there was something powerful around the fact that I was their classroom teacher.
Right.
But when I left there, I also went to my hometown, where I was a teacher in a Title I school that had formerly been a high school, where every single student had a connection with me because of where I was from, but there was more diversity. But here again, there are some additional factors to that I think we have to always push into this conversation. So it is critical. We do not have enough male educators. We need more. And when the classrooms, whether there's a socioeconomic difference or racial factor, we need to embrace the importance of exposing our scholars, our children, to as many exchanges in terms of personality, in terms of that individual that stands before them and influences them, to prepare them for the reality of our society. So I think that, again, research is clear that there is a change factor there when I look like the person standing in front of me. But I also think that there are some other elements that we have to include in that to ensure that there's success in the classroom.
No question.
Alberto, earlier you talked about economic and opportunity challenges. And one of the challenges, it'd be great to hear you talk more about, is readiness when you're 5 years old in kindergarten, coming into the school system. And 4 years later, you have to be a fluent reader. And how do you deal with that challenge? I imagine you have kids who come in who are reading chapter books, and there are other kids who come in who don't recognize the letters of their name.
So, I heard part of Lisa's introduction referenced, system-wide graduation rate. And I'm a true believer that the best way to improve high school graduation rates is by enabling and launching a very aggressive early childhood education program.
That's right.
Start early, trust me, much more effective and efficient way, lower cost of guaranteeing higher graduation rates, and quite frankly, better post-secondary success for students. Capitalizing both on the effective as well as the academic elements of education. And I can tell you, just using Florida as an example, and this is a stark statistic, it should scare all of us. Florida should scare many people, period. But, and I love my state, but
It's all good.
Third grade reading performance is the data point used for the development and the statistics specific to prison building.
Yes.
Capacity of jails in the state of Florida. $7,400 a year to educate a child. The early childhood program, universal pre-K in the state of Florida, funded on a basis of 3 hours of education per day, leaving out a huge percentage of parents, because what parent could take a child to a 3-hour pre-K program? What do they do for the rest of the time? So if you're working 1, 2, or 3 jobs, as often is the case for the neediest of children, who are the children of the neediest of parents, it's inadequate. But $7,400 a year to educate a kid in the state of Florida, however, about $58,000 a year to incarcerate a juvenile. So the level of input is so disconnected from a potential outcome at a premium, right? So I don't like to speak in hypotheticals. So in my school system, we leverage federal funding, Title I funding, to supplement the 3 hours of state-funded universal pre-K to provide a full day with certified teachers, which the state does not require. So as opposed to the reality in other districts where pre-K is offered 3 hours a day, in Miami-Dade, we offer a 7-hour and 20-minute program, early childhood program. Half of the program, half of the day is academic preparation, readiness for school. The other one is all about social and emotional preparation, arts and music, foreign language exploration. The social themes are so important that kids often lack at home. And it's been working for us for probably close to 2 decades. I really do believe that our evolution from a graduation rate of 58% when I became superintendent, and there's always something fantastic about averages. The curtain of average often hides pockets of underperformance that are significantly lower than the average itself. In the African American high poverty schools, graduation rates were as low as 35%. We went from 58% now to 90%. That's excluding charter schools. If we include charter schools actually in my community lower our graduation rate to 85%. But close to 90%. And I really do believe there are a number of factors to the support systems we put into place, the expansion of middle school, reforming middle school, investing in social emotional learning, recognizing that a full complement of the on-core side by side with core, strong electives that give kids the motivation to go to school, selective new contracts with teachers that differentiate pay on the basis of performance, respectfully negotiated, passing referendum to increase teacher salaries by 23% in recognition of their work, bringing digital transformation and convergence to the school. But the most important factor that has stimulated and elevated graduation rates, I know, has been our insistence in early childhood education with not only certified but highly effective teachers who understand the approach to holistic education to children, who recognize the gaps early on and are able to address them. If we do not do that by 3rd grade, trust me, by 9th grade, they're not going to be reading at grade level. By 12th grade, they will not graduate. And the best way to stimulate graduation rates is by investing aggressively in early childhood education.
So, Jack, I'm in complete agreement with Alberto, but
that's good.
I want, it is good. But I do want to highlight something, and this is a different inequity. In Alabama, we have been able to secure more funding for pre-K. And in Birmingham, all of our pre-K classrooms are first class certified, all full day, across the entire district. We lead the state in our pre-K offerings, and yet our waiting list, there is a waiting list that still exists. And then, of course, across the state, that has been a part of the state's initiative to invest more into pre-K because of how it makes a difference without being repetitive to the way in which Alberto has shared. That then becomes a national inequity around state to state. And what we say we believe, so here again, I stand firm with my colleague that is a part of the catalyst for what impacts graduation rate, which in this space, please allow me to say, currently Birmingham City Schools has a higher graduation rate than the 65%. We're at 87. I've been there approximately 24 months. It has increased over the last several years, and it continues to. I go back to what Alberto said, though. It is starting early, that early investment. And if we're calling out inequities, there's a lens that we need to look at nationally. Because if we know that research is clear, that this is where we can change the life of a child by investing early, why aren't we doing that across every state? Why is it that we're having to look for grants and funding for expansion if we truly want to see our children be successful at the very beginning? And the other piece that I will add to that, for me historically, that's also been a game changer in various districts, has also been the ability to involve parents, particularly in those earlier years. And that parental involvement is not just a recruitment of awareness, but an engagement, almost pushing into the homes, not almost, but aggressively. and helping parents to understand before they're even 4 years old why this is so critical in the life of their child, particularly if they are a part of a community that is high poverty or if parents have not had a chance for a more formal education experience. But the inequity I want to call out is the state-to-state reality.
State. Yeah. And Henry, we have about 5 minutes left. I think it'd be great to close talking a bit about national policy and policies that are beginning to address educational equity.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Jack. So one of the things, I will share, I am not a policy expert. But in actually looking at the policy landscape, one of the jumping off points for this conversation about equity has to be our question around data and our ability to use data to call out where we have inequitable outcomes for specific subpopulations of students. And this is an area that our colleagues at EdTrust have championed and have done amazing work around. Now, they can't do any of the work that they do as an organization empowering parents, other community members, without policymakers actually doing their work around making the data available. Once the data is available to actually call out what we see, then there's a lot that can be done. And they have a series of toolkits like their Data Equity Walk toolkit at the school level, which is an amazing experience. In California, they do a lot of work also connected with California policy around their local control and accountability program, where in California they've done a whole lot more work to actually push school funding decisions closer to where students are, and in doing so, making the data available so that community members can actually look at their districts and schools and understand where resources are flowing and who is actually getting access to opportunities based on that data. The one thing that we haven't touched on, and I don't think we're gonna solve in 3 minutes and 20 seconds, is just this deep integration between education equity and housing policy and real estate. And it goes back to this question of the structural inequities that are actually deeply connected to educational outcomes. I mean, decades and decades and decades and decades of redlining and other policies that were very intentionally created are very deeply connected with the outcomes that we see today. They were designed, we get what they were designed for. And so some of the things that some districts I think are doing more of, which is compelling, is this question of common or open enrollment, where, I mean, we're living in a situation where, particularly in a lot of urban contexts, we are in a de facto segregated state where schools are very deeply segregated. And so in places like Washington, D.C., you have these open enrollment systems that are not only just about trying to create these balances between neighborhood schools and school choice across town within district schools, but are also doing interesting things of integrating the charter schools together into one space that give parents and students more opportunities that allow them to get out of their zip code if those outcomes have been very intentionally set for them through these decades of policy. Now, part of the challenge is, and this is part of the challenge overall with education equity, is that you are going smack up against the structures that were put in place intentionally. And so when you do that, you have these, you try to redraw a boundary line in the district, and folk are going to be in the streets. Like they're trying to do that in Montgomery County right now. And just a couple of weeks ago, in Bethesda, just up the street from DC, you had wealthy parents in a high school talking about, you can't redraw these boundary lines because those kids are lazy, they're not going to do the work, there's going to be more violence. They're literally saying, like, white families are being punished for being successful. Like, this is what's being said. And fortunately, their very students, including under the leadership of a student that happens to be on their school board, has actually pushing on this question even more fully around redrawing boundaries. And what you see, and it's very promising, is the students themselves, white, black, and Latino, are coming together saying our education experience is not as fulfilling as it can be because the policy set is creating a very segregated environment. And so that's very promising to me, that not only that the policy is being looked at and gone after directly in those cases, but that students are actually feeling empowered to speak out and actually push on those policy questions.
I wish we could carry on the discussion. Maybe in the hallway we could carry on the discussion. But unfortunately, we've run out of time. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank our panelists for a great, highly engaging discussion on a very important topic. So thank you very much.
Very good, too.